Hi, my name is Aaron Bewley, and I'm a pre-sales systems engineer for EMC out of Dallas, Texas. I'm recording this video today to talk to you about the EMC Product Portfolio. I had a recent conversation with a customer that just got back from EMC World. He's a unified VNX customer, and he had some questions about all the different new architectures he saw. So I sat down with him to explain why we have such a broad portfolio. That conversation begins with one word: choice. It's very simple. We have to try to solve application requirements with the right storage architecture, not the other way around. If you start with the other way around, you're more of a vendor, right? With the choice from an infrastructure standpoint, we can be a true solutions provider. So things that we want to look for from an infrastructure standpoint, we're going to follow along a spectrum defined by that app workload, ranging from performance to capacity requirements. As well, we also need to understand that application service level agreement. Whether that's an always-on type of scenario, or more of a cold archive. Now, when we look at this from a performance to a capacity standpoint, we're talking about things like in-memory, block-based storage, file, or some type of unified version of the two. So we also need to look at storage architectures like object. From an SLA standpoint, we need to understand if this is something that we require continuous data protection on. Do we need to provide clones, snapshots? We're going to try to back up to disk, or are we archiving out to the cloud? This is the way that you need to solve from an application perspective, right? Some of our competition comes in with an infrastructure. Maybe they have a block device or a file device or unified or something along those lines. They can still make it look like they're solving from an infrastructure or from an application standpoint, by looking at IOPS, throughput, capacity, latency requirements. Right? As well, from an SLA standpoint, we can talk about RPO, RTO. This makes it look like we're solving for the application, but really, if you come to the table with just a hammer, all you're going to be doing is defining how big that hammer needs to be. If you're approaching the solution from a Home Depot type of approach, then we can determine what aisle you need to walk down to find the right tool to do the job, right? That's truly solving for the application. The difference there means that from a Home Depot approach, you're a solution provider. If you have the hammer and you're trying to find all the nails you can, that's a vendor approach, right? So let's say our application requires in-memory storage. I was talking to this customer about DSSD. Right? He's unified VNX right now. Does he have any type of SAP HANA workloads or the like? Let's look at what DSSD can do. As well, from a block perspective, do we need to look at constant inline data services like deduplication and compression, leveraging something like Extreme IO for sub-millisecond latency all the time for every application? Or do we need to look at something that's more of a unified storage, like Vmax, or stick with VNX like he's on, right? And the difference between these two is going to be more of a data services standpoint. If you require certain things like an SRDF or some other data services that I'm not really going to get into right now. File. So he has some file. He's got a little bit of file, maybe about 20 terabytes. If we need to eventually scale to something where we have an industry-leading solution around scale-out file storage, there's none better than Isilon, and obviously we would talk about that and the capabilities we have around providing services and basically different access to the data that sits on that Isilon, and then we would have the data lake conversation. As well, object storage, right? We're looking at something like an ECS platform where we have essentially globally all these different clusters of storage that are working together from a global standpoint with new types of applications where a file structure really doesn't make sense. One of the easiest ways to explain the difference here is with Isilon, I've got a file structure. Let's say, for example, the pictures I have on my home system. You know, I've got years and years of pictures of my kids and my wife and all the fun things we go and do, right? So for me to understand where that picture is as a human being, I want to remember, okay, this was in 2011 or 2010. I don't remember that well. I use my wife as the metadata, right? So she says, okay, it was in 2009 rather, go to May, and then it was that date time, right? I can find that. From an application perspective, think about something like Twitter. Twitter doesn't need to use a file system structure in its database to determine where to find the photo that I posted yesterday, right? The way Object works is when I take that picture and I store it and it gets stored into Twitter's database and it needs to refer to that picture, the application is unaware of what the storage is doing. All it says is, storage, hold this picture. Storage says, okay, here's the unique global identifier that ties to that picture, and it hands it back to me, and me as an application, I put it in my pocket, and I know that that's how I get that picture, right? And then no matter where I am in the world with my camera or my phone, right, same thing, I can request that picture and it's going to come to me from the nearest storage, or if that storage structure changes underneath or we move to a different file system or whatever, it just makes a lot more sense when we're talking about new types of applications and storage. So there's also unique ways we can replicate and protect that data that gets us away from some of the requirements within the file system structure. So when we move over to an SLA perspective, I was telling him about, you know, if we're talking about continuous data protection, if we want an always-on, hot site, co-production as I like to call it, we're going to be looking at something like a vPlex, right? Or if we want to add capabilities to his unified VNX, from a replication standpoint, there are very few things out there that can touch what Recover Point does and enables him from a local and a remote standpoint, giving him local DVR-like capabilities. As well, clones, snaps, backup to disk, right? We have the world-famous DPS suites. As well, great cloud solutions. You'll also see that, and he was talking about that too, that within all of our different platforms, you're starting to see the capabilities to tier out to the cloud. Things like, you probably saw the introduction of vSpecs Blue. Well, a hyper-converged appliance, you can only scale that out from a storage perspective so far, right? 14.4 terabytes, I think, between every node. Beyond that, I need the ability to scale out storage while it's cloud-enabled, right? Out to any sort of cloud provider that you want. So this is what you want to do, right? You want to be able to look at the application, determine what the app workload and the SLA requirements are, and let that determine what your infrastructure is and how you protect that data. So one of the questions I get sometimes, and he actually brought up too, is does this make us a jack of all trades, master of none? And I'd say no, right? If you look at Gartner Magic Quadrant, and you have vision on the x-axis and the ability to execute on the y-axis, where you want to be is in that upper right-hand corner. That's the leaders quadrant. How many times would you guess we're on the Gartner Magic Quadrant across this portfolio? It's 11 times. 11 times across our product set, right? And this isn't even everything. I'm just giving you a broad stroke from an infrastructure standpoint. Out of those 11 times, we're in this leader quadrant 8 times. That's a staggering amount, especially when most of our competition is joyous to even show up on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, right? So, and then those other 3 are, you know, high in the vision category or high on the ability to execute. As well, one of the things that I think is powerful from my perspective, kind of makes us the NASA of this type of market, is this number. 3.2 billion. That's the amount of R&D spend that EMC will, quite frankly, spend across our portfolio this year in 2015. It was about 780 million for Q1. It begins to tick up. It'll probably be close to 800 million for Q2. So we'll average out around 3.2 billion. So, in addition, between, you know, across all this, he's like, well, what's Viper? How does that come into play? All right. Well, that's how you maintain and provision and automate your storage infrastructure. As well, in addition to that, talking about ease of use and capabilities, quick to deploy, we can pick and choose those infrastructures that you require, and we can converge them all within one rack and deliver it on site. You tear down the doors, plug it in, and start going. Right? That's more like a VBlock approach. as well if I have some small remote offices, or maybe specific application workloads like a VDI project I need to do and I want to deploy it very quickly, I can look at the hyper-converged option, which is what I was talking about earlier, the vSpecs blue case. So, in a nutshell, this revolving around choice and giving us the ability to truly give you that industry-leading solution that speaks to your application requirements is what it's all about. That really is the EMC product portfolio and why it looks the way it does. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.